Hello and welcome to the Switchrpg podcast. I am one of your hosts, Just Johnny, and I am not joined by Geo. Geo is currently embarked on a side quest, but I am joined by Evan. Hello, Evan.
How's it going?
It's going good.
I like to think of myself as like inverted Geo, you know, blonde beard and everything like that. So hopefully I can give you some takes that are very different from his.
Okay. If this is your first time listening, this is the show from Switchrpg.com where we bring you all the latest in the world of RPGs on the Nintendo Switch. This week, we're talking about Monster Hunter Rise! And then other stuff. But first, Evan, what have you been playing?
That's a great question. And actually, earlier on Twitter today, I kind of put out a little thread of what I've been working on. But, you know, I've noticed that as much as I love RPGs, I do need to take a break from time to time. And I'm quite a puzzler fan. So I have been working through Cube 2, which is a sequel to, unsurprisingly, Cube 1. Or actually, it's just Cube. In any case, it's a first-person puzzler, very similar in style to Portal in some ways, physics-based, and you've got some manipulation. Rather than creating portals, you are summoning different kinds of cubes, and they do different things. Very different gameplay from the original, actually. The original, to me, felt a lot like a tech demo of sorts. But this is really refined, looks a whole lot better than the original game. The story is whatever. You are encountering a deity of cubes, which your mileage may vary, but it's been a really enjoyable play so far. I think I'm nearing the end, but you know, I've been enjoying it. Just in terms of some other stuff, I'm always working through Dicey Dungeons, which is a great sort of roguelike dice-based game. Are you familiar with, you know, the sort of tabletop roguelike stuff like Slay the Spire?
Yes, but Slay the Spire is that one's it. Typically, roguelikes have exploration as a key element, and Slay the Spire is not really an exploration based roguelike, but it definitely has rogue-like elements or light. I don't know. Sometimes people like to use those two interchangeably.
I mean, that's a topic that could be the entire, you know, subject of a podcast.
Yeah.
You know, to me, roguelike, you know, really does mean that your run is one and done, right? You're not really carrying over progress. And yeah, I suppose Slay the Spire, you unlock some more cards the more you play. But Dicey Dungeons, a little bit different. Obviously, it's dice based, and you're using the numbers on your dice to complete certain actions or equipment that you get. And it's different from Slay the Spire in that there's sort of scenarios for each of the playable characters. First off, it's got a whole lot more playable characters than Slay the Spire does. I think there's 6 in total. And they all do different things. They roll dice in different ways. It's a really cute game. It's got an amazing soundtrack, honestly. Like, if there is one thing that you should do, it's listen to the soundtrack. It's really awesome. But unlike Slay the Spire, which is kind of, you know, you can sign in and do your dailies, or you can just keep trying to ascend higher and higher. This is, you know, once you've completed all of these scenarios, you've kind of finished the entire game. So I don't really see myself kind of coming back to this one a whole lot. I'm slowly chipping away at each of the campaigns, but it's still a really fun game, and I would love to see the systems kind of integrated into something else. I was really gonna try to talk about Hellpoint. I was hoping that we would have another guest on here to talk a little bit more about that, but I haven't really started it yet at all. But I'm hoping to get into it.
Okay.
And I'm also I downloaded the DLC, the Myths of the Eastern Realm, for Phoenix Immortals Rising. Immortals Phoenix Rising. Oh God, that title just makes me so upset.
Yeah, that's terrible. I
Yeah.
I talked to we discussed it on a Geo and I on a podcast, I don't know, like months ago or something like that, and I said if you remove any one of the three terms that are in the title, you got yourself a good title.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. But they went the, they didn't know when to stop,
Eh,
those folks at
just one too
Ubisoft.
many.
Yeah, but I played just kind of the opening moments of Myths of the Eastern Realm, um, and I like it. It's I think it's really commendable, and this is something that I guess to me is the most appealing element of kind of the Ubisoft vein of open world games is that they do strive for a semblance of historical relevance and reverence, maybe even because you know uh, uh, the base game of Immortals is it's very much centered around Greek mythology, right? And if you've played Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you're probably familiar with a lot of the content that they're going to be talking about. I think that Greek mythology is something that we just hear about in general, but with this DLC, you are delving into Chinese mythology, and it's something that maybe
That's
not everybody
interesting.
is. Yeah, not everybody is as familiar with it.
Is it
And
still with the same main character?
no, yeah. So you're playing as a completely new character who I forget his name, but I think, and I would definitely fact check this, but the studio that developed this is a sort of Chinese based Ubisoft studio
That
um,
developed the DLC or developed the full game itself?
that developed the DLC.
Okay.
It's pretty directly emblazoned when you first see the title credits roll, and so I would assume that they probably got some assets and things like that from the original dev team, because combat is really similar. The combo mechanic, though, the combo mechanic in the base game is fine. I don't tend to focus on it all that much, but the combo mechanic in the DLC is actually really inventive, which you kind of unlock uh, these greater forms of your special attacks the higher that your combo rises. So it gives a kind of unique flair to combat. But for the most part, it's more Immortals, which if you like sort of discount Breath of the Wild gameplay and discovery and stuff like that, and that's kind of a harsh thing to say. It's similar in a lot of ways, but there are some things about Immortals that I just personally don't really jive with me all that much. I've written about it for the site, but it's still good, and I'm actually really enjoying this different sort of flavor of storytelling and mythology.
And what else have you been playing?
Um, I have just finished up reviewing both Undermine and Iris the Giant, which I'm going to be putting a review together for the site fairly soon. Which, again, another sort of tabletop ish game, card based deck building RPG. Um, I should say that's Iris and the Giant, not Undermine. It's a very, very different sort of game. And Iris is great. It's pretty straightforward. I think I kind of felt that I ended up beating the game by chance, because you unlock these bonuses by just continuing to do runs, and the bonus that I got for my next run was just like really allowed me to steamroll the game. But it's really very fun. It can look a little daunting at first, and the storytelling is okay. I think it's got a lot of heart to it. But yeah, just a fantastic little roguelite experience. And Undermine, I mean, I guess I didn't prepare myself for how much I'd be talking about roguelikes on this podcast, but Undermine is under fine.
Is it on the action side or is it on the turn-based side of roguelike?
It's more in the vein of Binding of Isaac, of Enter the Gungeon. So yeah, it's top down exploration, dungeon delving sort of stuff.
Is the
Um,
So with those games, they have their twin stick shooter elements in there. Is it the same thing? Twin stick?
uh, Not so much.
Or are we
So
talking something
this
like Hades?
Yeah, it's a little bit more like well, I wouldn't really compare it to Hades either. Essentially, you are a miner who is delving into this undermine place, and so you've got a pickaxe. That's your only attack option, and you can throw it, um, and it can kind of boomerang back to you, and you can play with how based on the boons or the sort of artifacts that you acquire, you can change how that throw might work. You can also enhance the power of that as well. But it's pretty basic in terms of the options that are available to the player. It's got a jump mechanic, which is a little bit too floaty for my tastes. Um, and really, when you swing at things with your pickaxe, you kind of get rooted into place. So you need to be very mindful about when you're going to be using that attack option. Otherwise, you really just want to kind of throw your pickaxe. But I would say if you're looking for a unique roguelike, or even a roguelite, there's other stuff out there that is going to offer you something really different. I think that this is a very basic sort of game, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, if you're just looking for something to, continue running on, and also, slowly progress through, because it's a roguelite in that you really are building up currency and stuff like that to enhance your character. It's a fine option. Um, the last thing that I would just mention is I've started Haven, and the game bakers, makers of Fury, which a lot of people have played and enjoyed from an action standpoint. This is their kind of take on an RPG, but also just like, I don't know, a chill relationship building, planet spanning exploration game. I don't really know how to describe Haven, to be honest, but it's very, very heavily centered around its two main characters, who are a couple who are on a planet for their own reasons. And you kind of grow their relationship and see their relationship play out while you're also kind of participating in these weird, active, turn based battle things. It's hard to describe. I'm still a little early into it.
Yeah, I remember seeing gameplay of that game. It looks good, but it also looks a little bit too simplistic on gameplay mechanics. Um, for regarding like RPG stuff, it certainly has exploration, and it has story. It just is lacking depth, seemingly lacking depth on sort of the combat mechanics type stuff, or conflict mechanics, because I don't know if I want to call it combat.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to put it. And in terms of character progression, I think it's a pretty slow burn. So, I've maybe sunk about 3 or 4 hours into it, but I don't really feel like I've gotten very far, and I don't really see, based on the options that are available to me right now, I don't see how the combat can improve or iterate on itself, but that might be something that happens in time. We'll see. So far, the art, it's very pretty. The characters are pretty decent. You know, if you're looking for a nice, you know, I don't know. I guess it's not a very difficult game. Is what I'd say. The combat doesn't really provide much of a challenge, but if you're looking to relax with a couple of characters and maybe see them um, do some relationship stuff, it's worth a look.
Cool.
Well,
So, are you done?
uh, yeah, and I was just going to ask. I see that you've been working on a game that I have really mixed feelings about, so I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts.
Okay. So, I've been working on Final Fantasy XII, The Zodiac Age. I did mention a few podcasts ago that it's on my to-do list, and I have started to do it. And it is an interesting game. It's definitely not going to be my favorite Final Fantasy, but it will be on the top of my favorite Final Fantasies because I don't favorite Final Fantasy all that much. Uh,
Okay.
it's a quirky game. The combat, the gambit system's great, and the gambit system is what makes the combat great because you can just speed through the combat if you fine tune your gambit system proper. Uh, and that's kind of most of the game is pretty much going to be doing a whole lot of combat-y, grindy stuff. And I would say this: I would not be playing this game if it didn't have that 4 times speed up option. That has
Oh
made
god.
this game a godsend. A godsend. I'm actually enjoying my time going through. I do like the character progression system too, where it's kind of like a chessboard, and you're stepping through and unlocking nodes on the chessboard that have associated abilities with it. But it's very it's very slow paced on character progression. The things you unlock are you have to unlock the ability to use the next weapon and the next piece of headgear or armor or accessory. You have to sort of spend this whole licensing point system thing in order to just unlock one, or maybe it'll be lump sum. There might be like 2 or 3 different like accessories tied to one node, but that'll be it. It'll be just those, and then you have to spend more points that isn't trivial to spend in order to unlock the next set of accessories or weapons. And the weapon would be only like 1 or 2 weapons of the same type, right? It'd be like you get the option between this bow or that bow, which will last you for the next like 5 to 10 levels, and then you're gonna out level and you're gonna have to unlock the next node, which is fine. It's fine. It's just a little bit slower pace, but it's fine. I actually like that progression system, especially when you unlock multiple boards that you can sort of progress through at the same time. It's and I would say this: the combat system is the best of the mainline Final Fantasies that I've played. And I've played a lot, and I actually do like it more so than Final Fantasy VII Remake because it's a bit more nuanced. It's this very nice in between of turn based and real time that Final Fantasy VII felt like just going full blown real time was a necessity, and it just felt like there was also like balancing issues with going full blown real time on Final Fantasy VII. So it's kind of a mixture. This one also has its own little weird quirks and issues and stuff like that, but it's good because it's definitely turn based, but it's also real time, and it's got that whole like pause the action as it's happening in real time mechanic. That's kind of cognizant of CRPG type elements.
Yeah,
Just
I
yep.
was gonna say that the way you just started talking about things and talking about the gambit system in particular, which to me is like I get why it exists and it's a really cool concept. It's just I think mixing the gambit system with the character progression system makes this game just like a step more tedious than it needs to be. But to your point, just saying that this is really reminiscent of CRPGs. It I never really looked at it that way when I was first playing through it, but now I totally get that idea because it's got this huge real time with pause element to it. It's actually really refreshing to hear a perspective like this, and I mean, I haven't played Seven Remake personally, but and I know some people who have, so I'm fairly certain you might get blasted for that opinion.
I don't
Um,
care. I don't care. Final Fantasy has never been a great franchise gameplay wise. It definitely has great stories. It's definitely got great graphics, phenomenal soundtrack. But when it comes to like core gameplay, it's just been done better in other turn-based and non-turn-based RPGs just across the board. Even Final Fantasy has done better than Final Fantasy, and by that I mean Final Fantasy Tactics, which is the best Final Fantasy, no questions asked. No one can even refute that. Mechanically, combat wise, it is the best Final Fantasy has ever been and played, especially for turn based Final Fantasies. No one can doubt me on that.
there's a whole lot of stuff that I could say about that, but I actually don't have a whole lot of experience with tactics in particular, so I'm just gonna zip my
That's
lip.
the thing. That's the thing. A
Right.
lot of people they hold Final Fantasy 6 and 7 and 9 and 10 sometimes to like high regard, but they don't play tactics, and that's where they fail because um, there's an element in turn-based RPGs, and this is just a general thing. This goes to like most turn-based RPGs out there. The whole aspect of of spatial awareness is lost. It doesn't matter about positioning is a non thing. Yes, Final Fantasy, what was it, 5 and 4? I think you had like a front row, back row type of setup. It didn't matter. It didn't really matter. It was negligible. That wasn't really much of a spacing type thing they had to be cognizant of and dynamic with. But then you go into, and this is like other tons of RPGs have that, right? Where it's just it doesn't matter where you place your characters, positioning doesn't matter. But then you have Final Fantasy Tactics and other tactics styles games where they do add that spatial proximity and that spatial awareness aspect, and it just completely opens the door to a massive untapped level of nuance and complexity in a good way, in depth in a good way, where strategy really does become a thing. And that's strategy and sort of adding that additional layer of depth strategy wise to a turn based game should be welcomed, because without that extra nuance to strategy, it becomes trivial. Where you can just make, for example, in Final Fantasy 11, you can set your gamuts to just auto attack, and you're pretty much going to kill everything with just auto attack and auto throw potion or heal at characters, and you'll just for regular fodder, just grinding, you can just autopilot that and just run around the field and just grind like crazy, and your characters will just do what they're supposed to do. The amount of sort of thought and foresight and reaction is very, very limited. And that applies to most turn-based RPGs where the sort of that reactionary element where you have to adapt to the strategies and tactics and sort of the events that unfold in the battlefield. It isn't really there or at the level of nuance that it typically does happen in well executed tactics games. So
Sure. I think what you talk about in terms of, and the way that I tend to boil these topics down is the economy of space, right? Which is really what tactics, what strategy games hopefully tend to deal with, and accounting for that in your gameplay environment is hugely important. But also the ebb and flow of combat too. I think is a huge part of appealing just combat systems in general.
Yeah.
And the gambit system, while I appreciate being able to plan ahead for just about anything, it sort of trivializes the feeling of there being an ebb and flow to combat. Um,
Well, I'm totally with you. It does trivialize it because you can kind of just figure out the optimal sort of gambit setup. But to me, that's not a flaw of the gambit system. That's a flaw of just turn-based combat in a way where positioning doesn't really matter. That's where the flaw is. And yes, positioning does matter a little bit in Final Fantasy 12. Um, but it's still kind of relatively trivial because area-based attacks, the area that they sort of hit and expand to, is kind of large, and if you are attacking an enemy with, I guess, if you're using a range weapon, then you might be out of range of most abilities and attacks, but not all of them, and it's that they didn't execute well on that whole like spatial part because it is a factor. It definitely is something that's there, but it's not something that you optimize with. So it still has sort of these lingering elements, this sort of hybrid. It does feel like a hybrid of what of the tactical strategy elements that you'd get in a typical tactics game, and the sort of abstraction that you of that of a more nuanced, realistic combat play out, realistic in a world that has fantasy fireballs all over the place. So that abstraction of how combat would unfurl in a fantasy world that you typically get in fantasy or Final Fantasy, typical traditional turn-based RPGs, because positioning, like I said, positioning and spatial awareness are not really factors that need to be considered by the player. So it does have, as I said, it does have some of that in there, but yeah, like trivializing it is, yes, it does trivialize it, but it doesn't trivialize it any more than what would otherwise still be trivial in other RPGs.
for sure.
In other turn-based RPGs, or turn-based RPGs that that aren't more nuanced in their combat mechanics. There are, for example, there was a turn-based RPG, Radiant Historia, which does have spatial awareness regarding the enemies and where they're placed in position. That does have an impact on things. So that's, to me, that's the extra level, the extra layer that is needed in nuanced complexity for traditional turn-based RPGs. And I think they executed that pretty well in Radiant Historia. And they didn't go into like overly nuanced, overly complex side of things. It just added the right amount to make things relevant to where you have to sort of add this extra puzzle solving element for how you're going to handle your turns and sequencing and stuff like that. So it's got that. So anyway, going off on crazy tangents. I'm still going through Final Fantasy 12, but I am not done with it yet. I'm probably about halfway through the game, but that's on pause because Monster Hunter Rise came out last week, and oh my goodness, Monster Hunter Rise! It has been, or a week and a half ago. It's been a while. It is the answer to all my prayers. That's it. I can die happy. The game is absolutely incredible, but we'll talk about that a bit more. And what I will say, though, is I finished Monster Hunter Rise. And by finished, what I mean is I got the first credit roll. I'm anticipating a second credit roll. Do you have Monster Hunter Rise, by the way?
I don't. I'm a big Monster Hunter fan, so this might sound like sacrilege.
It is.
I've played the demo. I enjoyed the demo. I have some thoughts about the improvements, the alterations to the combat system. But I get what you're talking about. You've completed the quote unquote single player portion of the game, which I think recently Capcom has done a better job at truncating that experience somewhat, so that you can get to the real meat of the title, which is of course hunting online. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, we'll share more of that in a bit as we get into the main topic. But for now, let's talk about some news. And first up is there's been a new game announcement that I'm aware of. There might have been others that I might have missed. But did you hear about this game? It's called Astrea Ascending. And it's
that's
apparently by world-class JRPG developers. It's coming out, let's see, sometime this year on Switch.
I did actually take a look at this title. I saw the announcement of it, and as far as things go, I mean, what I will say is it looks gorgeous. Lovely hand drawn sort of art style. You've got, I guess, some 2D exploration in terms of environments and things like that. And I don't really know the extent of the combat system. I don't know if it's pure turn based, or you've got some ATB stuff going on here, or what have you. But I mean, it's a very nice looking game. It's always good to see individuals from veterans working on new stuff. Some of these names here. I want to say Kazushige Nojima has worked on Final Fantasy VII. I'm not really familiar with his work all that much. And Hitoshi Sakamoto is composing, and he worked on, I believe, 13 Sentinels, which I know a lot of people have showered with praise over the
Yes,
past year. So
that includes me.
yeah, so it's a good looking title. The title art in particular really does evoke that Amano-esque Final Fantasy title, with the art and everything behind the logo. But
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what it ends up looking like. I'm curious to see what the price point's going to be too, just because with a lot of these hand drawn works, you tend to have a lot more art assets and time being dedicated to that. And I mean, I would say that the game does look really good, but being and I don't want to say, I know that it's coming to Game Pass in particular, but I wonder, just in terms of playtime, in terms of what's going on with this, and what sort of price point it might be set at.
I mean, personally, if it delivers a story and gameplay as good as 13 Sentinels, which was a full-blown $60 price tag, I am still going to be all for it. Right?
Yeah,
To me, the
I
price tag
mean,
doesn't matter because as long as the quality is there, and 13 Sentinels had the quality, and the game itself was, I think I beat it in certainly less than 50 hours. I can't remember how long it took, but it was a less than 50-hour game, and I platinumed it, which means I kind of went through pretty much all the content. So I felt like I got my money's worth, even though it's not the biggest budget and the biggest sort of bells and whistles and things being thrown at you. In this game, they have people, as you said, Vanillaware, specifically, working on this, and there are some definite elements here that kind of look like it's using, I don't know, the same engine or maybe some of the same artists as 13 Sentinels, but there is crossover.
Yeah, and I'm actually just gonna do a little bit more research as we talk right now,
Yeah,
because you know, first things first. I'm just a big advocate for Vanillaware in particular. I haven't played a whole lot of their titles. Actually, really the only one I have a whole lot of experience with is um,
Mur-
Muramasa, the Demon Blade.
Muramasa the Demon Blade, great game.
Yeah, which I loved. I thought it was a great sort of RPG, Igavania sort of a title.
Yeah,
But
very very light on the Ego Vein, but yeah, yeah,
yeah, just more really kind of traversing across a world. And again, in terms of what this game looks like, in terms of the animations and the art style in particular, it does evoke that sort of Vanillaware esque um, experience. But I don't know, is it being developed by them?
yeah.
Um,
So I mean, it looks like it's a team of a bunch of different randomized, pseudo randomized Japanese developers that sort of got together, almost like a Chrono Trigger moment. Although I'm not saying that this is going to be at that quality, but
yeah,
it kind
big
of feels like it's a
words.
mishmash of individuals getting together to just create this weird game. But I will say, what they showed off on the trailer itself, there are some bits of it. It does look good, but there are some bits of it where it gives me a little bit of hesitation to sort of to look forward to this game. I'm cautiously optimistic about this game. Because if you look at the trailer, you can notice, yes, the characters look good and the background environment looks good, but there's a lot of staticness in the scenes and in the video, how they play out. Meaning, there isn't much. The environments that are being portrayed aren't really all that dynamic and moving and full of motion and animation. Uh,
Mm,
there are some, for example, the battle. One of the battles that they showed in the trailer that does have some sort of moving gears in the background. So, and there's another one with like a waterfall that's animated. So the more they sort of develop this, that's the hesitance, right? Like they need to sort of really make the world immersive and lively. And the only way to do that is with animation and sort of a squishiness, add squishiness to the game. So I just really hope that they amp that up, and that's sort of part of kind of like the polish of a game, and nail that so that it doesn't look like it has this sort of a lower budget feel to it, because that can really separate the feel for the player. And I would say that the combat system looks to be a turn-based combat system. That's what it looks like to me on the trailer.
yeah, and again, a lot of those details, those aesthetic details that you mentioned, those are things that Vanillaware in particular, if you ever play any of their games, they bring a lot of life to their backgrounds.
Yeah,
Yeah, this reminds me of, I played very early in the Switch's life. Well, actually, maybe a year or two ago, I played Super Neptunia RPG, which I'm not a Neptunia fan. I just want to put that out there. Just because I played this for for the site does not mean I'm a fan of these games in any way, shape, or form. But yes, a full budget release that had very static backgrounds and did, I feel, cheapen the effect in some ways.
yeah.
So that again makes me think of you know uh, what the overall quality is going to feel like in terms of what we're seeing from the aesthetics. But I mean, does look like it's definitely looks like something to keep your eyes out for.
Yeah, and I just want to mention one last little thing, something unique that attracted probably everyone that sort of watched this video and or screenshots of the game. The game is 2D, which you said, but it's two. It takes place on a horizontal scrolling side scroller perspective. So it's not sort of the traditional bird's eye view, top down perspective, right? It's a side scroller. We're talking like Zelda 2, Muramasa, the Demon Blade, right? That kind of side scroll perspective, which we've seen done in like Castlevania, Metroidvania style games, but for a turn-based, well, looks to be a turn-based game, I can't really think of too many side-scrolling RPGs that has a turn-based combat system rather than an action-based combat system. So,
I mean, one that comes to mind for me, a flawed product, but one that I have a lot of history with, is Child of Light by
yep,
Ubisoft,
yep,
which I have really mixed feelings about. I think my love-hate relationship with that game airs more on the love because I can't seem to stop talking about it for some reason. But yeah, it's always nice to see developers kind of playing with perspectives, and again, just because this is a 2D side scroller RPG, that doesn't detract from the quality of it in any way. But I am wondering how, if we're going to be looking at a large world, if we're going to see some sort of world map or something like that. And those are things that, of course, we'll probably have to get our hands on the game in order to discern.
yeah. All right, so moving on, let's quickly go through some news items in the rundown section. First up, let's see here. Monster Hunter Rise has had the third best retail launch for the Nintendo Switch, and there's no extra qualifier there, so it's the third best third-party retail release for the ever for the Switch, which is huge.
In Japan.
Yes, in Japan, and that is a massive thing because they're also considering. Looks like I don't know if I'm reading this right, but it sounds like Pokemon is considered a third party. Is that third best? Oh wait, not even third party. This is all of them.
Just in general.
This includes all the Nintendo first party stuff too. So that's incredible because, as we know, Animal Crossing is the #1 best-selling Switch game in Japan. Pokemon is a big, massive thing, and this is #3, just like that.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I think that is very indicative of how people were really chomping at the bit for a new Monster Hunter game.
A new proper Monster Hunter on Switch.
Right. And, again, during the course of the 3DS's life, that kind of became a sort of haven for Monster Hunter fans. And it's, Nintendo has had a really good relationship with Monster Hunter. So yeah. I think a lot of people were really waiting for, this title or some sort of Monster Hunter title that was going to be exclusive. I know that there was Generations Ultimate, which I kind of skipped out on. I missed personally, but it doesn't surprise me that this is a big launch for a game. And also, it's important to acknowledge that the player base for a title like this has widened in recent years due to the success of World, right?
Yeah.
Which, say what you will. I personally haven't played much of World. I would love to play World, but I'm really excited to see what Rise looks like, because in a lot of ways they're saying it's a very big game. Seems like they're going to be, trickling out some monsters and things like that in terms of adding content to the game too. And honestly, if we fingers crossed, if we could forgo the Rise Ultimate sort of formula of things, if we could just get a nice big expansion pack similar to Iceborne for Rise, I would love that personally.
Yeah, I'm with you. Although they are adding stuff, free DLC updates, so
right.
If they can maintain that for as long as possible, that's obviously the best of the best, because we buy the game once, we don't have to buy any additional stuff because they're just giving free stuff in. But I am all for buying more if it's a nice, big, meaty package like Iceborne. something to that extent.
Right.
Yeah, it's selling like hotcakes, and it's going to continue selling like hotcakes. That game is going to be this year's Animal Crossing. Just mark my words. It's going to surpass 10 million, no problem. No problem
Ah,
whatsoever. 10 million.
well, okay.
Worldwide. Not Japan only. I'm saying worldwide, 10 million. That's going to be surpassed. It might even already be surpassed. It's going to sell like hotcakes. So next little rundowny is Immortals: Phoenix Rising, and you kind of mentioned this a bit. It got upgraded into version 1.3.0, and it's available right now. There's stuff in there. You want to go over it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Immortals Rising, kind of. I don't want to say a sleeper uh pick for last year. You know, a lot of people obviously made some comparisons to Breath of the Wild. But you know what we're looking at here is um, some nice patches, just in terms of improving quests and other elements. But the update also gives a primer quest for the Lost Gods DLC, and so they've done this a couple of times previously. The there was a patch before that kind of gave a sneak preview at what you might be experiencing in Myths of the Eastern Realm previously. And I'll be honest, I think that quest kind of wasn't great. uh, it's a quest that you can kind of just discover in the base game and complete. And
Yep.
it's I don't really think it's indicative of the quality of what Myths of the Eastern Realm was putting out. And so I'd be curious to see what this primer quest for the Lost Gods is too, because that I know is going to be very different in gameplay style to the base game.
All right. I guess the thing that I was hesitant about, because I never picked up this game and I was looking forward to it, was just the final performance of the game on Switch versus PS4 and PC and whatnot. And it just wasn't up to snuff. But according, one of the highlights for this patch is there is stability and performance improvements. So if it's significant enough, I hope that Digital Foundry puts up some sort of little double take. Maybe there's some frame rate improvements, or maybe there's some resolution improvements, or cross your fingers, there's both, and that would be great.
Yeah, you know, I think in terms of frame rate, I didn't really see all that many issues with the game. Although, and I should say, you know, I've played a good 50, 60 hours of Immortals. And I actually just recently started playing the Wii U version of Breath of the Wild, and that game has some definite performance issues. So maybe I'm just looking back on things with a little bit of recency bias, but I do think resolution, in terms of what you're seeing on Switch, is what's going to take the biggest hit for the title in particular. But I think it plays pretty well. I haven't had too many egregious frame rate drops, but it's a fine game made by professionals.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So next on the chopping block is, and I'm so excited for this, Neo: The World Ends with You. There's going to be some more information coming out, and it looks like it's going to be, what day is that? Is that Friday? Is that Friday? It is Friday. On Friday, which is the 9th of April, we're going to get some The World Ends with You, just piping hot information. I have no clue what it's going to be, but they announced it's going to be something, and I'm so excited for it. How excited for you?
I played The World Ends with You on DS back when it first released, and
Excellent.
I I mean, I think in many ways that's the definitive version of the game. Even though there is a definitive version on Switch, that
No,
game
yeah, you're right. The
it
definitive is on DS.
but it does not play as well on the Switch. It really does benefit from that touchscreen, dual screen action. With that being said, eh, I'm not the biggest World Ends with You fan. I will say the game's got style out the wazoo. It's a very neat sort of game, and honestly, um, I think pacing, just in terms of character dialogue and things like that, was a huge issue for me in particular. But I am more than willing to, and I'm actually really excited to check out Neo. I love the aesthetic of the game. I love the setting. It is almost like Shin Megami Tensei ish in nature, where you're kind of living in a modern Japan and experiencing the world, but there's some seedy stuff going on underneath. Well, Shin Megami Tensei is a little bit darker than this, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in just a second.
Well, I
But
mean, it is dark, right? You start the game and you're dead. So
right, but yeah. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the news. I'd like to see what they're doing with the new combat system. I think it shocks me. It shocks me that it took this long. Um,
yeah,
but
I'm with you.
that's all I've got to say about that. I'm cautiously optimistic.
I'm gonna be. I'm gonna throw caution to the wind on this one. I'm just optimistic. I'm just
Well,
optimistic. And the combat system going into 3D, yeah, it's guaranteed to be different.
for sure, and I just wonder, again, are they going to be ballsy and integrate motion or touch controls to this? Who knows? I don't really see that working all that well with
I
the
hope they don't.
Switch. That would kind of turn it into a handheld game.
Yeah,
Well,
they shouldn't do that.
but yeah, the pin system, badge system, whatever you want to call it, neat idea, and allows for a lot of expression in combat too. So if they keep that, I can see this being an action RPG that could become a sleeper favorite for a lot of people.
Yeah, a quirky one, very quirky. All right,
For sure.
so speaking of Shin Megami Tensei, there's a Shin Megami Tensei, not the one that we all want, but there is one coming out very soon on May 25th, and that is Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster. Oh man, that's a big title. It's coming out May 25th. Are you excited?
I mean, I'm a huge SMT fan, and I should say I'm a huge SMT fan with relatively little exposure to the series as a whole. I fell in love with four, with Devil Survivor. I have, what is it, Ghost Hackers on 3DS as well, and I also have Strange Journey on 3DS. So I've played a lot of those handheld installments, and a lot of people have great things to say about Nocturne. So I'm looking forward to it. It's not the one. You're right. It's not the one that I want, but I think maybe it's the one that I need right now. And so I'm looking forward to playing Nocturne featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we, we will see how that turns out. I'm just cautious on this one. I'm not optimistic. Although, if it turns out to be a great, trend port and enhancement of the game, and based on the review scores, if it scores well, I will be there. I will be there. No
Yeah,
question.
I mean, this comes from an earlier era where SMT was really known for being brutal, and I would say that the more recent releases have eased off on its difficulty a little bit, and I think that's been a good thing in terms of accessibility. So I know that there's a lighter difficulty option in this remaster, but also I think this might just feel a little bit aged in terms of its its quality and the things that it presents to people. So I will definitely be getting it. There's no way that I'm not, but I can understand your caution for sure.
Okay. All right. One last little bit on the rundown. Apparently, Hellpoint patch for the Switch is being certified. No official word yet on the DLC, and there's been an interview out there somewhere in the Nether. But someone else is going to have to sort of scurry around and find that if you're interested. But we'll talk more on Hellpoint probably sometime in the near future. But for now, we're going to move on to Rumorland. And this was kind of like a weird thing. There was a firmware. This is like pseudo non-rumor because this is real. Something real that happened is that there was a firmware update for the Switch that updated to 12.0.0, and apparently some data miners out there kind of looked under the hood and noticed that this opens the door to firmware updates for the dock. Something to do with that, which is weird, and that leads into like rumorland speculation, which is kind of what I was thinking. Since they first announced the Switch, that the dock itself, if you remember patents that Nintendo filed, like I don't know, probably like 10 years ago, when they had these external compute units. I think that's how they phrased them in the patents, where you'd have the main console doing the graphical power prowess, the sort of main sort of grunt work, and then it could leverage these external compute units in order to further enhance its. It treats it as a almost a resource, that an on-demand resource that it can tap into in order to get some extra bells and whistles cranked out in some sort of means. It was very vague. Most patents are, when they're filed in a very vague way, so that they can sort of umbrella a whole slew of different possibilities. And this was a very large umbrella for that particular patent. But the way I saw sort of the combination of the things was with the dock itself harnessing its own CPU, kind of like for people to sort of think of smart TVs. A lot of smart TVs now have built-in video enhancements that they can take to the original signal of things and enhance it. There is a trade-off. I'll explain what the trade-off is in a little bit. But they can enhance the image and make it look better in some way, where it adds better, smoother motion. It makes it seem like something that was previously 24 or 30 frames a second to some higher sort of refresh rate. It could add some degree of upscaling from what would be standard to 4K, that type of stuff. And these are the types of things that could be very realistic in happening for an external compute unit, aka the dock, putting some sort of processing unit into the dock itself just before, because if we remember, you plug your Switch into the dock, and then via the dock, the video goes to the TV. So you can think of it like this. The video is hitting the dock first. If the dock has this specialized compute unit in it, it could take that video, that image, and enhance it with additional processing capabilities, and then send it out to the TV. And what that opens the door to is it opens the door to upscaling, and there is a technology that NVIDIA cards have, what was it, DLSS or something like that, where it's an AI-based upscaler, where it can take lower resolution, natively rendered resolution imagery and upscale it, and be somewhat decent on its upscaling to the point where it doesn't quite look like it's 4K or 8K or whatever, but it's certainly better looking than what it would have been without the upscaling. Now, the trade-off for something like that, and here's where I have to sort of quash the hopes and dreams of people. When you do something like that, you get latency. And in the world of gaming, we do not want latency. Latency would be bad. So, I'm not saying we're going to get a whole lot of latency. Maybe there's some weird technical gymnastics that can be performed. But if we're getting anything beyond 3 or 4 frames of latency, that will be very, very bad, gameplay-wise. Although it does depend on the game, right? If this is a turn-based style game, then having that kind of latency is essentially a non-factor, because latency really just influence. It just has an input, an impact on input and responsiveness of the game controls. So the only games that would be impacted the most by latency would be action games, fighting games, things that are that have that require twitchiness in user response times.
All I've got to say is this is something that might feel like there's a lot of potential and opportunity, but let's be honest, this is probably existing in preparation for whatever hardware revision is coming out in the future. So all of you who think that there's going to be some sort of improvement to previous releases or even the base Switch, I wouldn't get your hopes up, personally.
Yep, and you are absolutely right. But I was in rumor land, so I could just say the most wildest, fantastic things, and not be surprised that it doesn't come true.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I try to be as much of a realist as I possibly can with things like this.
Yep. The firmware update, just on a realistic level of things, is probably going to be something along the lines of power draw, and that's kind of it. With additional power, you can do upscaling of the CPU, right? So that's probably where it's going to become a factor. And the CPU, I mean the CPU of the console itself. And the power draw would be the power that the dock provides to the docked Switch unit itself. If it can draw more power from the wall that you are plugging it into via the dock, because the dock would allow it, because the dock is the gateway for that, then you could, in theory, get more higher clock rate. What's it called? It's called overclocking. There we go. That was the word I was looking for. You can kind of overclock your CPU and GPU a bit, and your RAM and stuff like that. So maybe, I doubt it, because that could induce some sort of safety and potential what was it, deterioration, I guess is a word. So anyway, now we're gonna move on. Let's get out of crazy rumor land and let's go into some newsy stuff. So apparently the Tokyo Game Show for 2021 is going to be online, and it runs from the 30th of September to the 3rd of October. You have any thoughts on this?
TGS is it's an event. It occurs. We hear lots of things that get announced and might be exciting, and then we don't hear about them for a while. So I don't know. TGS will be an opportunity for people to show off some more gameplay of things that will be down the road. So I'm sure it'll be like a cute little E3 Part 2, The Revenge. Not as intense. Not as intense. Probably, and I want to say The Revenge because we'll probably see a lot of things that are announced or revealed at E3, given a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I'm with you. It seems like TGS is it kind of takes a little bit of a backseat because E3 is at the start of the summer, and then a little bit more than halfway through the summer, you have what's the Germany one? Gamescom? Is it Gamescom?
I think. I'm not even sure, actually.
The big European one. I believe it's Gamescom. That one has some fairly big announcements, and then by the time you get to TGS a month-ish later, you're kind of getting just Japan-only type stuff, and You do get some interesting announcements there, but it most of the time it's the new announcements that you get. You're getting a lot of rehash stuff, and for new stuff, well, you're kind of not really getting too much in the way of new stuff. But sometimes a few nuggets come out here and there. I think the first time I heard of 13 Sentinels was due to TGS. I could be very wrong on that.
Yeah,
I
which
don't know.
against ended up being a sleeper hit for a lot of people. So,
Oh yeah,
uh, but yeah, you are right in that it's going to be a lot of Japan centric stuff, which for people like us, that might be exactly the kind of stuff that we want to see.
so speaking of E3, they finally sort of lifted their head from the sand that it was buried in, and decided. Oh, they have a quote here. It says "Game on." End of quote. So there's a bigger quote, but essentially they said, "Yep, there's going to be an E3, and it'll be an online only event," which is fine because, as far as I'm concerned, the only way I experienced E3 was via online. So this is a win for me because last year I was robbed of E3. You were robbed. We were all robbed of a legitimate E3 experience.
Yeah, that is a dream of mine is to actually attend E3. But you know, previous years, obviously we've seen Nintendo really err towards a digital format. So I don't think that this will be too groundbreaking in particular in regards to what they're going to bring to the table. My only hope is that we really do get a chance as members of the press that we get some sort of. There was, I think, middle of the Wii U's life, they pushed this concept of Nindies at home, where you could download a whole set of demos for a lot of indie titles that were going to be released on Wii U. I believe it was right around E3. Um, Obviously, that takes a lot of legwork to coordinate, and not everybody is going to have a demo prepared for what a press conference that's going to happen in like 2ish months.
Yep.
So, um, that would be the most appealing and ideal outcome. But I think more or less we should just expect to see something more traditional in terms of what Nintendo's been doing for the last few years.
Yeah. And I would like to just raise this little side perspective thing of, and it's kind of stemming off of what you said about playable demos or the lack thereof, because this will be a digital only type of presentation. We might see a resurgence of fake, fake videos, fake presentations, fake gameplay. There have been a few studios across the board that have shown games running way better and looking way better than the actual delivered product. That has happened. Ubisoft has done it. Various Sony studios have done it. I mean, Microsoft, various studios have done it. I mean, it's been done kind of across the board. Pick and choose, and maybe they're guilty of doing something like that. So this opens the door for something for that type of shame on you type of tactics to occur, marketing bits to occur. So if it looks too good to be true, uh, maybe it is. You can kind of tell whether something's gameplay or not based on how well choreographed the presentation of things are. So if it looks too well choreographed, then yeah, it's probably faked up a bit. How much faked up? Well, we'll have to wait and see until people in the press, media, etc., demos and stuff like that become playable for others. I mean, just look
I
at a great example is what's that game that came out that everyone was hoping for to be the next the big game to rule them all. RPG, Cyberpunk 2077.
I was going to say it, but
And that was playable, and everyone was praising it. And then it became playable for realsies for everyone. and oh man, was that bad. That was so bad.
Yeah, playable on certain consoles and things like that. That the
I had
game
it on the
wasn't.
best. I had it on PC, and it was still bad.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we could talk. That could be a subject of a whole podcast.
Oh yeah.
Cyberpunk, and here's hoping. I don't condone any sort of behavior regarding people
Studios.
hacking studios or sending death threats to these people. I hope see CD Project Red,
Yep.
Project CD Red again,
CD
Immortals
Projekt Red.
Phoenix
Yeah.
Rising. But I hope that they can crawl back and scrape their way back into the hearts of others. I think they just did release a pretty substantial patch too for the game, but it might be too little, too late,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
that's always a shame to see. But play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna talk up your game that way and then not deliver, that's the onus is on you.
Yeah, and they're not the only ones guilty of something like that. I mean, I don't know if you remember Peter Molyneux and the major hype he gave to Fable or Milo and all those
For
crazy
sure.
little projects he did.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Molyneux.
So there is one weird thing about this E3 announcement that apparently is going to be a big deal, because I watch all the major press conferences, and according to this little blurb out from the E3 peeps, companies that will be present would be Nintendo, Microsoft, aka the Xbox, Capcom, Konami, Ubisoft, Take-Two Interactive, Warner Brother Games, and Koch Media. That's a weird one. But,
Coke. Oh
yeah,
man,
yeah,
didn't know they were getting into the industry.
Koch Media. Yeah, that's an odd one. But the big glaring missing anomaly here is where's Sony? Sony's not here. There's no Sony. No Sony at E3. What's up with that?
I don't know. I mean, again, even before the pandemic, E3 was becoming something of a non-entity, because of how so many of these publishers and things like that are trying to speak directly to their consumers now with digital events. State of Play, Nintendo Directs, what have you. Does Sony think that they're too good for E3? Do they think that it's a waste of their time? I mean, based on what was it? I think maybe not the last E3 that we had, but the one before that, where they shepherded journalists to a bunch of different auditoriums and
Oh yeah, they
let
flubbed
them
so
watch.
I
mean, maybe moving on from E3 isn't a bad move for them, but
actually, I think that was 3 E3s ago, because
yeah,
the year later they didn't do anything, and then the year after that, which was the past 2020 lockdown stuff, they didn't. Obviously, no one could do an E3 then. So I think, yeah, I think Sony has what's the word, PTSD over their really bad last E3 presentation, which was that sort of herding of people from one arena to another, and that did not work well.
Yeah. So if they're not going to be at E3, I would assume that they are going to put something together around that time to kind of compete in the space. And whether they do it before or after E3, does take place, I think that might benefit them in some ways.
Yeah. All right. We got a couple last little tidbits of news. You wanna tackle these?
Sure. Just a few things to throw out there. Relatively recent updates as of this recording. Children of Morta just got a big patch, a little bit of free DLC, which again I think they have been pretty strong advocates of not offering paid DLC, offering a lot of free updates. Although they did have a great benefit for animals with a bit of paid DLC. I forget what exactly that entailed, but I know it was in benefit of animals in particular. But this update is pretty substantial. It adds kind of a I don't want to say a hard mode or an endless dungeon, but it's definitely a unique dungeon. It's called the Family Trials mode. Um, you've got some revamped systems and things like that in order to work for this mode, and that's neat because Children of Morta is a neat game. In my personal
Yeah,
opinion, I've
yeah.
quite enjoyed it.
The game's
Uh,
really good. So, and this is free, right?
it is free, yes.
Yeah.
That
So
that is,
they're already
that's the best
enhancing.
part.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Nothing to
um,
complain about that. So, and what about
yeah,
Star Renegades?
Yeah, also received a patch, which, listen, I'm not sure if anyone knows of what Star Renegades is. I'm familiar with the title in particular just because I played the developer's previous work, which is called Halcyon 6, which was good up until it wasn't. And this game was not good um, on release. It had a lot of performance issues.
Yeah.
And um, that's always unfortunate to see because it does cripple a lot of people's interest. But they have just released a pretty substantial patch that is a little bit later than some other platforms, just because I think Nintendo worked pretty closely with them regarding how to go through their certification process for submitting patches, but also kind of worked with them in terms of just making sure that the game would operate best on Switch. And this is apparently a much improved version of this. I mean, if you take a look at the article that that we uh, have in front of us, there's some pretty substantial fixes and improvements.
Yeah, and
Uh,
for people listening and watching the article, it's Nintendo Everything. They have sort of a report on the latest Star Renegades patch. It's substantial. This is big.
yeah,
There's a lot of improvements. They added some new content, and it's not trivial. There's some decent new content there. Massive amount of improvements and fixes, and then also another massive amount of balance changes.
yeah. Which again, the game itself, it looks incredible.
It does, yeah.
It's just a gorgeous game, and based on what I've seen of Halcyon 6, their gameplay systems and what I've played of Star Renegades too. Their gameplay systems are uh, they're functional. It should work as a sci-fi themed turn-based battle system. But it's just nice to see that it's going to be running smoother, and I'm going to give it a much more honest chance now that these improvements have been made.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's go on to the main topic. And the main topic is Monster Hunter Rise, our collective impressions and pseudo review. Now, you haven't picked this up yet. What's the
No,
rationale for that?
I mean, unfortunately, this game is coming at a not so great time in my I don't want to say personal life, but I've just got other things that I've got to focus on right now.
Yep,
And to me, um, you know, I know that if I pick up a Monster Hunter game, I'm going to sink an ungodly amount of time into it. I
yep,
just know that. And
yep.
so I need to just remove that temptation of even doing that from my life. And so that's why I have to just forgo this right now. In terms of releases too, yes, Rise will get a discount at some point. And price isn't a huge factor for me, but I do know that I'll be able to come back in and enjoy the game, especially if they continue to trickle out these updates that seem to be the case with this. So I did play the demo. And yeah, I have some thoughts about that, but you have a little bit more experience of the game, so I defer to you on the topic in particular.
Yeah. And I've read and watched various reviews and impression pieces of other, getting other collective opinions from various other sources, and based on, as I said, the credits have rolled, but that's probably I wouldn't even say the halfway point for the game, but we could, for the sake of brevity, it's the halfway point when the credits actually roll, because there's still so much more to do after that. Most of it is going to be in the hub area. There's essentially two major parts of the area to the game. There's the village type stuff, which is all of your solo only activities, and then there's the hub, which can be co-op multiplayer, and you can also solo it. You can random group up with other individuals on those quests as well, and those quests in general are going to start at a higher difficulty level. So, for example, think of those quests being 1 star higher than what the village quest star ratings would be, and in some cases it might be 2 stars higher. And that's kind of the difficulty difference between the two. So if you just start off and do the hub quest, then yeah, you're going to get a difficulty that's going to be kind of normal with a Monster Hunter game. But if you start on the village quest stuff, it is easier. It is I would say they refined the pacing of the single player Monster Hunter experience to be more beginner friendly, and that sort of what used to happen in Monster Hunter games is there would be bumps, difficulty bumps along the road as you progress and acquire better player skill in playing in adapting to how Monster Hunter demands of you for playing, and they've smooth that out. This is probably the smoothest boat to hop on and just cruise along. I did not fail a single mission throughout the single player adventures. Not one. There was absolutely no failure. I didn't cart 3 times on the same mission and have to redo it. That did not happen. Which is interesting, because that has happened to me on pretty much all other Monster Hunter games that I've played through before then. And I've played, I think this is my 5th one, right? I started on Try, did 3 Ultimate, did Generations, played a little bit of the demo of Generations Ultimate, didn't really care for it because it was too much like Generations, but on Switch. So I was just like, it's a 3DS game on Switch. I'm done with that. And
really? So you skipped 4?
I did skip 4. And then I also did Monster Hunter World, and went deep into that, because that was where Monster Hunter needed to go, the direction. And Rise is kind of a continuation of that. And it's like a beautiful continuation, because it takes a whole lot of good improvements from World, but also doesn't forget about where it came from with Generations and Try and all the other older style Monster Hunter games. And it's this, to me, it seems like this perfect balance of the two that works out super well. Now, it won't be as immersive of a graphical experience as World. That much is pretty much obvious. But it is certainly, in my opinion, certainly the best iteration of Monster Hunter to date. There is lots of variety there. It is a little quicker to sort of get through the single player content, the village quests, and it does feel a little, I guess, limited per se. But that's just the village stuff. When you go into the whole hub world content of things, there's so much there, and there's way more large monsters to hunt in this form without the DLC stuff that's going to be free and coming out. There's so much more in there versus what World had at launch. So it's already a bigger package regarding monster types than world. It's just not a bigger package regarding biomes and sort of the land that you can explore around. Um, but it feels just right. It really does. And then you combine all that with the new gameplay mechanics, and there's really two major ones, and one is the Palamute, and the other one is the Wire Bug, and that's those two things really do change Monster Hunter in a massive, massive way. Just fundamentally different ways to play the game, and fundamentally funner ways to play the game. Just by a lot. There's no going back.
I mean, I remember back when For You came out, and For You was the additional installment we never got base for
Yep.
in the North American territories, but I do remember them releasing a just a developer notes sort of commentary and saying, oh, one of the new weapons that we wanted to implement into For You was this thing called a hunting hound, which would be like a creature that you rode on the back of and fought on top. And I was like, man, that shit sounds so cool. And I feel like the Palamutes are the logical expression of that. Now, obviously, you can't draw your weapon while you're on top of them, but you can move around and express yourself and gather and attack and even use items. And so, just as an extension of your arm, in some ways, I feel that they are. I agree. I love the concept. I wish that there was a little bit more combat that you could do on them. And I think that if they wanted to go in that route, they should have focused on that rather than the wire bug. But wire bug is fine too. And the wire bug it's a neat concept. I think this whole idea of cooldowns, adding cooldowns to Monster Hunter is smart. I actually think that is a wise choice because it just gives you another sort of resource to be mindful of. Aside from stamina, aside from sharpness, aside from all the varied things that monsters are going to be throwing at you, and it's just a neat mechanic. It's I agree with a lot of the things that you're saying. Obviously, you're always going to get those articles. I think I saw either Polygon or Kotaku, complaining about how Monster Hunter matchmaking is terrible, and it's like, I mean, it's obtuse in its own special way, but it's not terrible. And
yeah, I think the part that makes it weird and, as you said, obtuse is there's a lot of menus in Monster Hunter. Sure. There's menus upon menus upon menus, just lots of menus.
And even if you want to learn how to play, you might have to do some menu diving too. There are things that you just might not be aware of. But I thought personally back when I played For You that was the most accessible, approachable Monster Hunter game. So to hear people saying the same thing about Rise is great. I think again, I just want more people to get into this series because it's in so many ways just like the epitome of a power trip. Wielding a giant weapon and fighting dinosaurs. What could possibly get any better?
Yeah, and it has that that aspect of get good that a lot of people that adore the Souls-like series, there's a whole lot of similarity in Monster Hunter where your progression is tied entirely to your gear, and you can only acquire new gear when you actually hunt and slay a monster or capture. And if you cannot defeat a monster, then you cannot get the materials, the carvings from that monster in order to get the gear that gives you the better stats. So it is the embodiment of you gotta get good Otherwise, you cannot progress. And yes, it's not as difficult as some of the Souls-like games, but these fights, these very long boss fights, because they're essentially nothing but boss fights, are long and they are difficult. They're just not, Souls level difficult, but they are very difficult and they are challenging in, I believe, just the right way. Especially when you get to the high rank stuff. And once you get into high rank things, they ramp up that difficulty, and then hopefully, when they bring in G rank, they ramp up that difficulty again, and then it's like, you gotta be on the dime with everything that you do, but you don't need to do high rank in order to beat the game. So there's that.
Sure. And again, in some ways it feels unfair to compare Dark Souls and Monster Hunter, because they ultimately are trying to do two very different things. Do they have similar stamina mechanics? Do they have similar I think when you integrate precise positioning into any combat system, as is the case with Dark Souls and with Monster Hunter for sure.
Yep.
You add a you add a skill. I don't even want to say it's a ceiling necessarily, but it's almost just like it is it's a gut check, so to speak,
Yeah.
in terms of just making people think more about what combat looks like and how combat plays. And the one thing that I think adds a great deal more to Monster Hunter, and I think Souls does this. Souls likes do this very well too. But I played God Eater 3 for the site. I reviewed it for the site, and it is in a lot of ways similar to Monster Hunter. But the attacks in that game lack, I think, a little bit of the weight and momentum that Monster Hunter animations have. And committal animations, I mean, that is the name of Monster Hunter's game. And
Yeah.
so you're very right in saying that, yes, you do need that gear to get good, but if you are not good at just the basics of combat, you're not going to have a good time with Monster Hunter.
Yep. And that's where the pacing that I mentioned earlier really comes into play, where they throw the right types of monsters at you, and they do that in form of quests that you take on, and they do it in such a way that it does train you and sort of give you sort of the means by which to improve your skill set. Because it's not going to throw the big giant monsters at you right off rip. It's going to throw the smaller ones, and it'll be smaller ones, for example, like the Izuchi, which are kind of like the Jaggy. The Izuchi monsters at you that are easy to take out, and then you take out them, and you take out maybe a few other small ones for quests, and then eventually you're going to fight the Great Izuchi as your very first large monster hunt, and it's like the Izuchi, so you're kind of already kind of familiar with how to fight it, but it's obviously bigger, has way more health, has more powerful attacks, but the movement set of that monster, there's similarities there that you can leverage, so you can sort of take your training from the fodder Izuchi over to the greater Izuchi and really start to sort of work on that. And then from there, they throw another monster that is similar but different, and they just keep having that go in such a way that the pacing just feels right, especially for newcomers to the Monster Hunter franchise overall. For me, as someone who's played multiple Monster Hunter games, it felt too easy. I wasn't getting that difficulty there for the village stuff, but I was perfectly fine with it because it wasn't too easy for the sake of making things trivial, but it was on the easy side. So for my liking, would I've liked things to be a bit more difficult? Sure, but I completely understand where they were going with as far as pacing for the single player content, and it does feel right. Just and it isn't easy to the point where it would upset veterans uh, of Monster Hunter. And it does feel easy enough for newcomers to sort of to not get to not run into the big large monster wall over and over again, like I've done in the past. I think the first time in Try, it was the bear off that was my wall, and I had to fight that monster. I don't know. It took me like 5 or 6 different hunts in order to maybe up to 10 hunts to finally take it down. That was my wall to sort of climb. And that was
Yes.
a good feeling when you finally get over it.
Yeah, the Bareth was definitely a big uh, gate for me as well. And again, I think when you're at the point that you are at, in particular, right? Um, you are ready to tackle those multiplayer quests. You're ready to tackle high rank and things like that. And so maybe getting this campaign out of the way faster, with less difficulty is a good thing. But maybe you also do want a hint at what difficulty does lie here. But I think ultimately this being a more brisk experience doesn't take away from this in any way, because I think you still have really positive impressions of the game. So um, yeah, it's great to hear people enjoying it. It's great to see people enjoying it. And the hope is, of course, that more people get the opportunity to enjoy this series, because again, it is extremely unique. Just as a concept, the way that it's executed. And I don't really think that anyone does it as well as Monster Hunter does. And we could talk about, again, people who have attempted, uh, God Eater being one example, Final Fantasy Explorers, which
Yep.
was a sad thing.
Dauntless being probably one of the closer adaptations.
Dauntless too,
Yep.
for sure. But nobody does it quite like Monster Hunter, and it seems that nobody does it quite like Monster Hunter Rise. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. And just to go a little bit back on the wire bug stuff, that is, as I said, it is a game changer because it adds an element that was kind of missing from Monster Hunter, which is the encouragement to explore. It also adds the mobility stuff, which is an obvious given. But this is probably more so than any other Monster Hunter game. You actually do want to explore each of the biomes, the areas, the area maps that you can go into uh, to a significant degree. They sort of hide various secretive nuggets throughout each of these things, and they are hidden oh so well. And you have to be very well versed on your wirebug capabilities in order to access these hidden little treasure troves that are around, and you get rewarded very well for doing that. So there is a major exploration factor that Monster Hunter it did have, but it with this new wirebug mechanic, it really does ramp it up to such a large degree, especially with the verticality that every map in this game has, and the ability to just move in a very vertical manner it is liberating, to say the least. Very liberating. It they they need to take this mechanic for the next Monster Hunter game. It needs to be a requirement. That's how good the Wirebug and Palamute sort of stuff feels for it. So really good
Yeah,
stuff.
and the last thing that I would say too is that, to me, the progression of the series has been all about just improving your ability uh, to be mobile. I mean, I'm not the greatest fan of the insect glaive, but jumping and climbing and things like that, it just became such a huge element of For You and everything that came after. And I felt that that was a great addition. And so seeing more additions that enable for more mobility, for more verticality, for more engaging gameplay. That's just always satisfying to me.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of a wrap on our Monster Hunter Rise impressions / review. Moving on, listener questions or lack thereof. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to hear from you. Remember, we're all about community here at Switchrpg Podcast, so if you want to be a part of the show, you can email your feedback and questions regarding anything that we talk about to podcast@switchrpg.com. You can also dive into our Discord server at discord.switchrpg.com and post anywhere along our channels and whatnot, and just have a little chat. We want your questions, and we would love to respond to your questions on our podcast. So with that said, there are some upcoming RPGs. On the 6th, we have a game called Breath Edge? Breathage?
Breath Edge, yeah. This is a sci-fi simulation survival game. I am actually reviewing it for the site right now, and I didn't realize it actually came out yesterday. So yeah. I guess I could talk about it a little bit more freely, but I won't do that. What I will say is it looks cool. It's very quirky. I would definitely give it a chance.
Okay, and it is a purdy game.
It is indeed purdy.
It's got some nice graphics. All right, coming out on the 8th of April, we have a game called Don't Give Up, A Cynical Tale.
Yeah, this game gives me, personally, some Y2K, a postmodern RPG vibes. I don't know if that's the case. I'm pretty sure this reviewed a whole lot better when this released initially. I know that this is a port to Switch in particular, but I am curious about what this game is all about.
Yeah, it's a weird looking one. It's hard to tell what's going on in the game, but there's stuff.
Always a good sign when you can't tell what's actually going on.
All right. Also on the 8th is another game called Astro Aqua Kitty.
Yeah, it's it's a shoot 'em up that has some RPG elements in it. That's not my thing personally, but if you like shoot 'em ups but you don't want to die as frequently, I guess that would probably be a good
yeah, and
a good time
it's
thing.
Actually a good looking game too.
Yeah, for sure.
It's real good looking. It's all sprite artwork going on here, and it's good looking sprites. There's it's got the whole kind of R-typey type of thing. The UI looks good and clean. It kind of has a good polish to it. This might be something to pay attention to. It does release on the 8th, so I might have to check it out because I like space shooters, and an RPG space shooter sounds like it's right up my alley. So
yeah, glad to see that you've got some positive impressions.
Just from what I've seen, I did not play it yet. All right. Last game coming out on the 8th is a game called Always Sometimes Monsters. And I gotta hand it to you. This does not look good.
I don't know what to say about this game. I'm looking at screenshots. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's more of an adventure game, I think, than it is an RPG. And so that means I don't have to think about it as much because that's not really my style of game.
All right. So on the 9th, which would be this upcoming Friday, there is a couple of games coming out. One of them called Ravensword Shadowlands.
Yeah, I heard somebody describe this as like an Elder Scrolls Light. which, judging by screenshots, that might be how I would describe it. It's not the
Yeah.
prettiest looking game.
And by Elder Scrolls, we're saying Morrowind, not Skyrim.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. And so, if that's maybe in your wheelhouse, I know that this is going to be nice and cheap. So if you're looking for a little bit of that sort of action, maybe give it a look. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to be selling for $7, so that is pretty cheap. All right. A biggie, and I think a lot of people are going to be looking forward to this, coming out on the 9th, The Legend of Heroes, Trials of Cold Steel 4.
Don't buy this game.
Oh, no.
No, that's just a hot take from me personally. I made the mistake of reviewing Cold Steel 3 without having played 1 and 2. And despite that game having a plot synopsis for the first 2, because for some reason it's really difficult to get those first 2 over in the States. This is a series that is hugely it's all about world building. It's a very slow burn. So if you're looking for a game that is like 70 to 90 hours of content, yeah, these games are for you. But when I say that there's not a whole lot of plot development, it's slow. And if you are planning on picking up this series with 4, that's a huge mistake. But with that being said, obviously those of us who have played this series before and who have been waiting for the conclusion, I know it's out on other platforms, but it might just be nice to have on Switch. I know that this is highly anticipated, even if I personally have no love for it.
Okay. I was actually expecting good things from that, but word of caution. Word of caution. That's what I'm getting. All right. Coming out on the 15th, 2 final games. The first of which, another doozy, Saga Frontier Remastered.
Yeah, I guess I'm like I'm skirting the engagement or with Saga. I've played The Legend of Legacy and The Alliance Alive, which use a lot of Saga's mechanics, but are a little bit more modern games in their own way. And obviously, our site director Ben is just the biggest Saga fan in existence, so he is really hyped for this remaster. And you know what? Maybe I think this might be a good time for me to dive into it. So I think I'm definitely going to pick this one up.
Yeah, and for me, this is a game that I will definitely dive into if it reviews well. That's my typical response for most games, but this is one that I want to review well. I do want it to review well. All right, last but not least, the last game coming out on the 15th is Deland Pocket Planet Edition.
I want to say it's Deland, but I don't know. In any case, I've heard from some other people that this is a nice, prettier version of the original game that plays a little bit smoother. I think it looks adorable, personally, so I'm probably going to give this a shot. But that's all that I can really say about this.
Yeah. All right. And that's going to wrap up this episode of the Switchrpg podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and remember to send in your questions and comments. You can listen to the show each and every week at switchrpg.com, or you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app. If you listen on an app, please give us a rating and review. 5 stars, please. We want to climb up the charts on those platforms, so your support there would be amazing. It would be. And finally, remember, you can head over to Switchrpg.com for all your RPG needs for the Nintendo Switch. Until next time, I'll see you around.
Take care.